Welcome everybody, and warmly welcome to our second webinar in the series about language education, hosted by NESET. Hello from a tropical Brussels. It's very hot here today. Our panel are spread out between different countries. I don't know if you are sweating as much as we are, but it's very nice. It's a great summer's day. The European Commission is organizing these webinars in collaboration with NESET. My name is Kristina Cunningham. I work for the Commission in the area of language education and multilingualism. And NESET, the acronym stands for the Network of Experts in the Social Aspects of Education and Training. And a team from this network has put together a report which we called The Future of Language Education. And the series of webinars is a very nice opportunity for us to go into depth in some of the case studies that the researchers from NESET have examined and analyzed in the report. I would like to thank NESET very warmly for hosting these webinars and for looking after the technical side of things. It worked quite well last week when we had the first one. I'm really grateful that you took on this role. If you missed last week's webinar, don't worry. It was about the Binogi technology and how playful videos can help multilingual children to succeed with all subjects. The recording, the edited recording from that webinar has already been posted on NESET's YouTube space. So you can look it up and check it out anytime that it's convenient for you. Now, some short household rules. You are very welcome to post comments and questions in the chat box right away and while the presentations are going on. There are several hundreds of you out there, so we shall not be able to answer all your questions since we would like to keep this webinar relatively short. But they will be on record. We will try to come back to some of them at our wrap-up seminar that we will have in 2 weeks' time. And if you would like to keep in touch or ask your questions directly to any of the panelists, NESET can help you to establish the contact. Okay, today's seminar will be about how school networks and labels can work to promote multilingualism and language education. And we will also talk about rather unusual and unconventional language teaching methods. We have an absolutely amazing lineup. The first person who is going to speak is my friend Ellen Rose Kambel, who is the director of Rutu Foundation for Intercultural Multilingual Education. And the idea was that we would post the website to Rutu Foundation so that you can look it up for yourselves. Thank you, we have it. Okay. And this is an NGO which is focusing on raising awareness about the benefits of mother tongue education and multilingual education for migrant and indigenous children, to bring in their languages into education. Ellen Rose, you grew up in Suriname in South America before you moved over to the Netherlands. And your own educational background is in law. You are a lawyer of human rights, and you're specializing on issues of discrimination and exclusion in education and how that can be avoided through languages, among other things. So that was the first speaker from my neighboring country, the Netherlands. For our second speaker, we're going down south to Italy. Gisella Langé, very welcome. You are a foreign languages inspector from the Italian Ministry of Education, at the same time specializing in curriculum development, intercultural education, and web-based teacher training. Very topical today. You are interested in innovative learning practices through international projects, which is exactly what we are going to talk about today. And what you will talk to us about today is the CertiLingua Network of schools. You are a member of the International CertiLingua Steering Committee, and at the same time you are the president of the Italian CertiLingua Evaluation Committee. Very warmly welcome to you. Then we're going back up to the Netherlands, to Groningen, where we have a very big university. Audrey Rousse, is it Rousse or Rousse? Rousse.
Rousse Malpat.
Rousse Malpat, merci. You're an assistant professor of language learning at the University of Groningen. Your speciality is research in innovative language teaching and dynamic usage-based pedagogy for learning, say, a second language. We will focus on learning French, I think, in your presentation. Quite nice to look at something else than English, if I may say so. You are the co-founder of projectfrench.eu, if we can have that address also up in the chat box for everybody. Projectfrench.eu, which I understand is a platform for language teachers who want to take this usage, to take a turn for usage-based teaching in their work. So we're looking forward to hearing more about that in a little while. After these three amazing ladies, we're going to have a comment from the other side of the big pond. Jim Cummins is joining us from Ontario, Canada. Very, very, very welcome back, Jim.
Thank you.
And if, in case you still need any introduction, I'll just quickly say that you are Professor Emeritus at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto. You have close connections with Finland, where you worked at the Åbo Academy for 3 years. Your research focus is, among other things, on literacy development in multilingual contexts. And I leave it at that. There is some more information about Jim in the research report from NESET, and I welcome you all to look it up. Right, I'm going to invite Ellen Rose to begin to talk to us about her big project called Language Friendly Schools. We are very curious to know what that is about. We are going to keep the presentations relatively short, and all the speakers know that I'm going to be very, very strict and show a little sign when there is 2 minutes left. They know this, so I'm not saying it for them, I'm saying it for the audience, because they might get angry on your behalf. Because I know how passionate you all are and how much interesting things you have to tell us. So I will feel very bad myself at interrupting you, but I will still do it. So now I'm not going to steal any more of your time, Ellen Rose. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kristina, for this introduction. I'll share my screen with you now. And I will also stop my video just because it's too much multitasking otherwise. Thank you for inviting me here. I'm very, it's a great pleasure and a great honor, really. And before I begin, I really have to say a few words of thanks. And first to Jim Cummins for the incredible work you have done at a time when only a few people were paying attention or caring about linguistic diversity in education. You know, you have inspired so many researchers who have continued in your footsteps to study the various aspects of multilingual education. And also, perhaps more importantly, you have inspired so many teachers to bring it all into practice. Now, as Kristina said, I am not a linguist, I'm a human rights lawyer. And my job is to convince people, not just that children have a human right to use all of their languages when they are at school, but also that it will actually improve their learning. And Jim, you have made my work so much easier because I can simply refer to the mountain of academic studies that back up this claim, and a lot of which originate from your work. So I really want to thank you for this. Secondly, I want to thank and also congratulate Kristina. I don't know if everybody knows it, but Kristina has really been the driving force behind a recommendation from the European Union Council on a comprehensive approach to the teaching and learning of languages in 2019. And in this recommendation, the Council refers to multilingual competences that as one of the key competences that could foster, among others, intercultural understanding and social inclusion. And it also mentions the languages added by the immigrant or refugee populations as completing the linguistic picture in Europe. This is very important, and I will come back to this. And I think very few people appreciate the work that is involved in getting people from across Europe together to attend expert meetings and roundtables. And for years, policymakers, education experts, teachers, teacher trainers have come together to talk about and to share new insights that embrace the reality in Europe today. The reality, which is that our societies and therefore our classrooms are becoming more and more culturally and linguistically diverse. A reality, unfortunately, that a lot of politicians prefer to ignore. But look where we are today. More than 1,000 people have signed up for this webinar from around the world, not just Europe, to learn how to bring this diversity into the classroom, to bring new approaches to language learning. And this is amazing, and I really believe that without Kristina, none of this would have happened. So I now have 2 minutes less of my time, but I think it is important that we recognize on whose shoulders we stand and how we got to where we are, especially in this time when I think all of us need hope and encouragement. So I will now turn to the language-friendly school. What are language-friendly schools? And how can cross-border school networks encourage language learning, the topic of the day? Well, the language-friendly school is a network of schools where all languages are welcomed and valued. And this picture here was taken this year at the Silver Creek School in Toronto, Canada, one of the first of 3 language-friendly schools. And you may spot a familiar face. That's Jim Cummins there. And for those who have been at last week's webinar, you will also recognize Emmanuel Le Pichon, who is one of the authors of the report that inspired this webinar and also a co-founder of the Language Friendly School. And there is another person that I want to draw attention to, which is Roberto Di Prospero, the principal of the Silver Creek School. One of the reasons why Roberto wanted his school to receive the Language Friendly School label, and in fact they were a language friendly school long before we ever came up with the idea, was his personal experience. He came to school speaking 2 languages, Italian and English, but he left school with only one, English. He lost the Italian, not only because it wasn't taught at school, but also because it was never valued. He received the message that English is the only language that was important. And with the loss of his Italian language, he said that he also lost part of his roots. He lost the connection with his family back in Italy. And this is something that happens to many children. And in fact, I'm wondering how many people who are watching this webinar today have this experience. Maybe in the chat, you can tell us about it. With how many languages did you enter school and with how many did you leave? Now, what does it mean to be a language-friendly school? Well, first of all, the school makes a commitment, a written commitment that they do not prohibit, discourage, or punish the use of home languages at school, which means that all students and parents are free to use their own languages on the school grounds. And that language-friendly schools do not allow exclusion or bullying around languages, dialects, or accents. Then the second thing is that each school develops their own language-friendly school plan. What does it mean for us to be language-friendly? And they do this with the whole school community. So it doesn't just come from the management. It doesn't just come from the teachers. It is a plan that is developed together with the parents, with the students, but also with the support staff, like the concierge, people who often are multilingual and who are often called in to help with translation. Now, what is in the plan is up to the school. We have created a roadmap to help them with ideas and strategies, but it is up to them to choose what they will do. As you can see here on the roadmap, on the left are the commitments, what schools don't do. This is required. Also making a language-friendly school plan, but the rest is optional. And some schools can choose only one thing, like making a multilingual school library. Others say they want to do everything, and maybe not immediately, but they will plan for it in the future. So why exactly do we start the language-friendly school? Basically, it is to support the creation of inclusive schools. Around the world, schools have told children who came into their door that they should leave their home languages behind, as happened to Roberto. And they often meant well. Principals and teachers and school policymakers were convinced that the best way to educate children is to teach them in and through the dominant language, by which they meant that all communication at school should be in the dominant language only. And to make sure this happened, they introduced all kinds of punishments. When children would speak their own language on the playground, they could be beaten, have their mouths taped off, they would not be allowed to go to school outings. Or it was done in a more subtle way that they were rewarded when they would only speak the dominant language. And also parents were asked not to use their home languages with their children when they came to school to drop them off. Now I'm using the past tense here, but these practices are still occurring today. And my organization, the Rutu Foundation, is collecting cases. So if anybody has experienced language discrimination, I want to encourage you to fill out a survey that we will put in the chat. Because unfortunately, as well-intentioned as this was, it did not improve the learning outcomes of multilingual children. What it did do was, as Jim Cummins has said, is communicate to students the inferior status of their home languages and devalue the identities of speakers of these languages. Prohibition and punishment leads to feelings of inclusion, to disengagement, but also to actual lower performance. A study in Belgium showed that children who were punished when they used their home language at school performed worse than their peers who were not punished. And finally, prohibiting children is also a violation of their human rights to an education that is free from discrimination, and as the Convention on the Rights of the Child says, an education that is directed to respect for the child's parents, his or her own cultural identity, language, and values. Now, so what Language Friendly Schools was created to put an end to these practices. What they do is not just that they encourage students to learn new languages, whether this is the dominant language or other foreign languages, but also, and this is important, that they support them to maintain and develop their home languages. Children are encouraged to come to school with all of their languages and to keep their languages until they leave school. Now, how they do this and which language they get to maintain and develop, this will be different for each school. But then this is also a choice that parents can make together with their children. And we have a few examples of what they do. These are particular pictures are from Canada as well. But we also have language-friendly schools in the Netherlands. One thing are welcome posters throughout the schools, translations of signs that are posted in the school. Language ambassadors like these kids here that take around welcome parents and show them around. As I mentioned, multilingual libraries, and this can be done. Sometimes people say, well, it's so expensive to buy these books. Some schools have produced their own books with bilingual stories that are written by the children themselves, sometimes with the help of parents. And also with actual bilingual teaching materials, bilingual maths or bilingual stories, which parents can do at home and which teachers then can repeat in the classroom. We have piloted this in the Netherlands and also in other countries in Europe. So the language-friendly schools is not a methodology. We don't tell schools what they have to do. It is really the other way around. Principals and teachers tell us and each other what they are doing and whether it works. So they really are the knowledge generators, as Emmanuel likes to say. Now, what we do with the support of researchers such as Jim and Emmanuel is first to provide a theoretical background. Second, to empower teachers and principals. What we found is that there are a lot of people out there, but sometimes they are on their own. And by being part of the language-friendly school network, this can really empower them to continue and to innovate and their practices and try out new things. And finally, of course, our role is to share what they are doing in the classroom together with the parents, with each other, and ultimately with the rest of society. So all of this really sends the message that all languages are welcome and all languages are valued. And it is important to realize that it's not just a message that goes out to the children, but also to their parents and even to their grandparents, their family members who might live, everywhere in the world. And it's interesting that since we started, we have been contacted by schools really around the world, not just in Europe. We are based in the Netherlands. This is where we started the pilot. And because of Emmanuel's involvement, we have a number of language-friendly schools in Canada. But we have been contacted by schools in Austria, Belgium, in Central Asia, in Turkey, England, Ireland, Kenya, also the Caribbean, my home country, Suriname, and in Southeast Asia, the Philippines, Myanmar, even, and Australia.
Ellen Rose, I don't think you saw my sign.
I am nearly finished.
Great.
This interest has really been incredible and indeed very hopeful. And together with the support now of even the European Union Council, which recognizes migrant languages as part and parcel of the European heritage, shows to me that perhaps the world is finally getting ready to really shed its colonial past. That we are realizing that in order to build inclusive schools where Black and brown lives matter, we need to build inclusive schools where all languages matter. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. That is a fascinating project, and the way it's spreading throughout the world is just amazing. We will come back later in the chat and with some questions about more, because there have been lots of questions about the house and the what's of the language-friendly school network. But we will continue now with a different kind of school network, the CertiLingua Network of schools, which is more focusing on the teaching and learning of school languages, let's say, to get a population of multilingual children with also intercultural competencies. They may be less diverse from the start than the average language-friendly school in Ellen Rose's network, but I think your goal is almost the opposite, is to go from less diverse to more diverse through the teaching in school. Please tell us a little bit more about the CertiLingua network, Gisella.
Okay, nice to be here. It's a bit difficult for an Italian to speak only for 10 minutes, so please let me know when I'm going over the time. I hope you can all view my screen. Am I sharing my presentation? Am I? Yes, okay, very well indeed. So, first of all, the motto for CertiLingua is plurilingualism in a European dimension. And I'm here today because I'm representing the network which is spreading all over Europe, not only the typical European Union countries, but also the Federation, Russian Federation, with the city of Perm, is a member of different ministries belonging to different countries. Germany is the leading country, and North Rhine-Westphalia is the member state who began the activity in 2007, years ago, with the Netherlands, and soon Italy joined and other countries joined. As you can realize, not all European countries are represented, yet more and more countries are being interested, such as the yellow, the further partner countries. It's nice also to understand that the German schools abroad in Nairobi or Shanghai or in other countries in the world, in other continents, are working with us. How is the CertiLingua network organized? It is organized thanks to, as I was mentioning, the member states. And the member states are asked to sign a memorandum of understanding. Of course, it's a requirement to safeguard the decisions that are taken annually in an international conference. And during this international conference, we usually organize and vote for an international steering group. And I'm very grateful to the international steering group today because I'm representing them, and they opted for me in order to present what the CertiLingua network is. Of course, Düsseldorf and the Ministry of Northern Westphalia is leading the activities, but with the cooperation of all the other representatives in the different member states. what is important to understand is that we usually try to organize unanimous decisions, and that, of course, quality control is vital in our program. Of course, schools are the core of our work, and schools are now a network of more than 350 schools all around the world. But it's actually, according to different criteria and different requirements, that CertiLingua labels are offered to students. So CertiLingua is a label that focuses on good quality for students. So the definition of CertiLingua c'est le label d'excellence pour les compétences internationales et européennes, bien sûr. I'll try my best to say it also in German. Excellence Label für mehrsprachige europäische und internazionali competenze. E naturalmente anche in italiano è un attestato di eccellenza per competenze plurilingui e pluriculturali assegnato agli studenti. So students, as I was mentioning, is our target, and you can find all information with the CertiLingua Net. How does it actually operate? It is a standardized procedure because it certifies high levels of competence in 2 modern foreign languages, and of course the must is a bilingual competence and also the ability for students to act in a European or international context. So it is a label that is offered to highly qualified students in Europe. With this graphic, you can better understand how what are the profiles that we usually ask our students to have. Our students must have 2 modern foreign languages with minimum level B2. And in many cases, we have students who have even C1 or C2. And in many cases as well, we have students having 3 foreign languages with a high level of competence. The bilingual competencies are guaranteed by a school where courses in a non-language subject are being offered. CLIL activities must be offered in all schools for a minimum of 70 hours in the last 2 years, or a minimum of 140 hours in the last 4 years of upper secondary schools. But the core, and I will explain it better later on, the core of the project are the intercultural competencies that our students must have after a face-to-face activity. A face-to-face activity that has been a project abroad, a stay with different people, even in your own country, but you really must prove that you have grown with a very, very precise competence in international knowledge and encounters. What are the advantages of CertiLingua? Definitely, it's the promotion of plurilingualism, intercultural learning, and international cooperation. And in many, many cases, it is the promotion and extension of the existing binational agreements. For example, ABIBAC in Germany, that is the German certificate at the end of upper secondary schools, and le baccalauréat. And the same in Italy is the BAC, l'esame di Stato e il baccalauréat, that is the French diploma. Of course, what is vital is to understand that there must be a sustainable school development, because every school must sustain the offer for CertiLingua for the years from when they start on and on. And there is, of course, a distinction of the schools who belong to this network, a distinction because they really are focusing their curricula on plurilingualism, linguistic expertise, and also a very strong international commitment is asked for. The international commitment sees, of course, at the basis, the need of an active citizenship, an active European citizenship, which of course focuses on the 8 key competencies approved with the the European Union recommendation voted in 2018, the competencies for lifelong learning, and of course the multilingualism recommendations offered by the European Commission in 2019, the one focusing on a comprehensive approach for the study of languages. And of course...
Cara Gisella, hai 2 minuti.
2 minuti, va bene, grazie, cerco di fare rapida. Allora, of course, the Council of Europe and the European Commission with all their documents are leading our work. Of course, the promotion of international cooperation between schools and ministry and the mobility of the integration of students, teachers, and foreign language assistants are part of our focus and of our leading activities. I'm just showing you the different certificates that we deliver. This is the German certificate because there's an adaptation, of course, to each country. So in Germany, a certificate in German is offered. In other countries, mostly the certificate is offered in English, as you can view on the screen. And in Italy, we have a certificate issued in Italian. To translate such documents is not easy, and of course, for example, the translation of the CertiLingua standards for intercultural encounters is of vital interest. But the document of reference that I suggest you all to read is the CertiLingua Compendium, which is available on the website in English, German, Italian, and also in Estonian. CertiLingua dokumendid muustavat CertiLingua programmi aluse dokumendid jagumdat CertiLingua. I'm not focusing on the Estonian language now, but this is to show you that we are trying our best to have not only English but other languages. The translation of the CertiLingua Compendium into the Italian language has been one of my most beautiful experiences, because translation means adaptation, and it means also to compare different texts in German at the beginning and English at the end. But as I was mentioning, the standards of excellence for CertiLingua are at the core of the experience, and the reference documents were one which was produced by the Netherlands some years ago, and the other one was the FREPA. And the next possibility will be to focus on the mediation activities as offered in the new companion volume of the Common European Framework for Languages offered by the European Council of Europe. Now, what do you get after?
Is this your last slide?
Okay, all right. So you get guidelines for tutor, you get guidelines for students, you get a checklist for students, and summing up, CertiLingua is definitely more than a language certificate. It really connects peoples and culture, and it represents excellence in the public sector. Thank you very much for your attention. Spasiba, Danyabad. Gracias, alla prossima.
Mille grazie. That's wonderful, Gisella. Thank you so much. I know exactly how difficult it is to run through this. And it's also hard not to go into the details, because there are lots of those as well. And I can see in the chat that our vast audience are very hungry for more details. But you gave the references, and there's plenty of opportunity to look up and to get in touch, right? Thank you. With that, we will move on to Audrey. And you're going to tell us how the classrooms can be made more interactive, more dynamic, for a faster learning of different languages. Please.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very honored to be here today. And I will present you an innovative teaching method called AIM that I came across during my research activities. And I ended up conducting a large study about its effectiveness. So my talk will be organized around four main questions. Question 1, what is AIM? And what is the history of this method? Question 2, how is it different from other language teaching strategies? Question 3, how can this method contribute to the more comprehensive language education and multilingualism? And finally, I will say something about how it can be upscaled. But let's start with question 1. So what is AIM and what is its history? So AIM stands for Accelerative Integrated Method, and well, it's accelerative because it accelerates the learning process of oral proficiency at the beginning of the acquisition process. So as you can see on the graphs here, I found in my study that indeed learners had a flying start in oral proficiency the first 6 months of acquisition, and then they capitalized on those gains afterwards. So it holds also for writing proficiency, but as we will see later, learners concentrate on their oral skills first with that method. It is integrated because it integrates different approaches and theories on second language acquisition. So it uses the natural approach to teach language authentically, the total physical response to teach routines in a playful way, through scaffolding techniques, for instance. It uses a story approach. It uses as well gestures. We can call it a usage-based approach on second language learning and teaching, because through stories and plays and music and games, learners automatize routines and follow a process of imitation, reproduction, entrenchment and production until they produce creative stories themselves. It exists for French as a second or as a foreign language, but also for other languages, for English, Spanish, Mandarin Chinese, and Japanese. The accelerative, so the AIM method, we call it, was created by Wendy Maxwell in 2001 because she was not satisfied with the existing teaching methods used in Canada. She realized that in Canada, a country where French is an official language, some children were still unable to speak or understand the language after years of instruction in school. So for her, part of this failure was due to the fact that existing teaching methods focused too much on teaching and practicing grammatical rules and not enough on using the language meaningfully. She invented a method for teaching French in primary schools that employed various techniques from different language teaching theories, as we saw. And she had found those theories to be effective, and also she wanted children to have fun in the classroom. So the method has been used all over the world now, but empirical evidence on its implementation only comes from Canada and the Netherlands and concerns only French as a second or foreign language. And well, the method came to the Netherlands for very similar reasons that when Maxwell started creating it. So French teachers were frustrated here with the poor results obtained using traditional book methods. So they were unable to sustain an entire class in the target language, and so that their students were not learning much. As you can see on this graph, part of the problematic could be explained by the lack of target language use in the classroom. So what you see here is that for English, you talk a lot of English in the classroom here in the Netherlands, and their English level is very, very good. But for French, for instance, or German, most of the time is spent in the mother tongue, so in Dutch. In fact, if you look at it well, you talk as much French in the French class than you talk Latin in the Latin class. So when teachers saw Wendy at a conference in the Netherlands, they decided to implement her method. So now there are 100 schools that use it. So to teach AIM, you need to follow a START course at the University of Amsterdam or in Canada, And there is also an online certification that is not compulsory, but in my opinion, it's highly recommended. The second question is about how different it is from other language teaching strategies. So, well, this method does not take an analytic approach to language learning as used in most traditional methods in the Netherlands. So it's inspired by literature on implicit language acquisition, and it takes a dynamic usage-based, it falls under the dynamic usage-based approach because of the frequency of its exposure that is obtained through playful drilling, repetition, and a strong focus on meaning. It has a high focus on oral skills at the beginning of the learning process, and it uses principles such as the pared down language. So pared down language is a very smart way of learning vocabulary in combination, so routines. It's a set of 600 to 700 words that are accompanied by a gesture. And this is used in the story that they listen to and in the plays that they perform and all the activities that they do. So there is also a use of gamification to accelerate target language use in a way that anxiety in speaking decreases. That's also a bit the goal, and that motivation increases. So it's a very playful way of learning language, and by entrenching routines that are pleasantly repeated. And the learning process follows a cycle of imitation. I don't know if you can see it because it's on the right side of my slide, but it follows a cycle of imitation, reproduction, production, and creative production at the end. So these are examples of stories that are developed, and these are for children or teenagers. And these are the gestures, and as you can see, can come very handy in French because you say a word differently than how you write it. So starting with oral skills makes sense. Now I'll focus on my third question. So how can this method contribute to the more comprehensive language education and multilingualism? Well, studies in Canada and in the Netherlands come to different conclusions about its effectiveness. But if you look closely at the results, you can see that studies show that AIM learners are more fluent and more confident, they take more risks, and they maintain more the second language, not only in the spoken language, but also in the written language. So they can learn to communicate in the target language very quickly, and they develop a certain ease and confidence in using another language than their mother tongue. So it makes it possible to really learn a foreign language in a classroom, in a setting that is poor in the L2. So from our observation, we know that most AIM learners of different academic levels enjoy the French class as they learn a new skill without anxiety. Because of its holistic approach to language learning, it gives the opportunity for every learner to develop its language skills following their own path. And here I have a metaphor of a 3D printer. What you have to think is that the 3D printer is the brain of the learner, and everybody will build another landscape because they will have the same input, they will do activities that look like each other, but what happens in their brain is really much individual related. So different techniques used in AIM tap into different learning styles other than the analytic learning styles, which we normally see in language teaching. So it uses techniques that tap into the kinesthetic learning, where you use your body, your movement. And it's appealing to different kinds of learners. Another important observation that can be made is that, well, AIM is inclusive in nature in a sense that it does not require proficiency in a particular first language to learn French as a foreign language. There is no contrastiveness that is building the method. So in other words, learners with different L1s were not disadvantaged in our study, for instance. So its use in the classroom can be seen as more inclusive. And in my opinion, it can be applied to heterogeneous groups as well, in terms of both academic level and mother tongue. So students with various language backgrounds and literacy levels can be placed in the same classroom, and because the key principles of the methods are about repetition of routines in the form of stories and playful learning. My last question is about how to upscale this. And I hope that I'm not going to get into trouble with time. So am I okay, Kristina? I didn't see your sign. Okay, good. Well, the last question is about how can it be upscaled. So what you need to know that teachers, learners, school boards, and parents need to be appropriately educated on its use and effects, particularly with regards to teachers. We think that teacher training programs should include a module on those implicit techniques for teaching. So teachers need to learn a new set of skills and acquire new knowledge about language acquisition. And in order to upscale it, if you look at very practical aspects, I would say that first of all, you need more knowledge about the existence of such methods, maybe included in the curriculum of future teachers, but also validation is necessary. So if education inspectors could look at it and make it and look at it for themselves and decide if they think that it's valid enough to be implemented in their country. Also, what I think would help is to develop the methodology for other languages. We had interest, I heard there was interest in Finland, for instance, for Finnish for migrants, for instance, or German, or other age groups as well, because now it's very much for children and teenagers. If we do so, then we will need more AIM training academies. For the moment, there is only, in Europe, there is only one, and it's located in Amsterdam. I would like to finish my talk by saying that what I think is really important is that, well, the co-founder of Project French, Wim Gombert, and I, we really believe that teachers are handcrafters, and they need the time to develop their own material, to think about their teaching. And so give teachers time for personal development, for creating their material. That would very much help upscaling. Thank you very much. If you want to have more information, you can look at my website, mail me, contact me. I will be happy to continue the discussion.
Thank you very much, Audrey. I think all three talks have triggered a lot of interest and curiosity. And I think you can count on being contacted for more information, all three of you. We have so many different questions, and we have covered a very big, large variety of topics. Before we give the floor to Jim for some summing up comments, we are very curious to know who is out there. We know that there are many of you. We know that you are from Europe, all over Europe and beyond. And we have prepared some questions for you now to reply to us so that we know a little bit more about you. Could you post the link, Cosmin? We need you to go to the www.menti.com, and those of you who joined us last week, you know exactly how to do this. You need to go on your browser, open a new window, open the website, menti.com. And when you're there, you put in the code 507622, and then you will see the question that opens up. And it's a very simple yes and no question. Did you participate in the previous webinar, which was about helping multilingual children to catch up and succeed through the use of online language learning tools and creative videos in many languages? So we are very keen on you to actually open up this parallel window, menti.com, so that you can reply online, because it will help us to understand a little bit more about who is with us today. Since there are so many of you, we can't talk to you individually. But these are quite interesting figures for us to see. Okay, we will go on another 30 seconds. Time for people to find the website. Okay, looks like we have more newcomers to this webinar than we have repeat audience, but many of you were already around last week. Okay, so we're coming to an end with the first question. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much for that. Can we have the second question, please? The second question is about geography. We would like to know where you are. And those of you who didn't have time to answer the first question, no problem at all. Just put in the code 507622 and just type in which country you are in. So I can see that Italy is in the lead, closely followed by the Netherlands. I'm not surprised somehow to see that result. It's a little bit logical. So if you write the Netherlands, it will come up as a small dot. But if you just write Netherlands, it will be the Netherlands. And then we have Spain, Valencia. But we are very pleased to also welcome participants from the Philippines, from, oops, they disappeared. Philippines. I think I saw Trinidad Tobago, yes. Trinidad Tobago, Turkey. India. Quite a few participants from India. And I can see several autonomous regions of Spain on the picture. And sometimes even individual Spanish cities. Right, Canada, of course. Indonesia, welcome. We have the UK, but we also have Scotland. And I can imagine we also have Wales. Uzbekistan, Colombia. Okay, this is so fun, but I think we have to go on. So, Cosmin, if you would please put in the final question. Here we would like to know what you work with. What is your interest in this webinar? Please let us know which sector you represent. Are you a student? Are you a researcher? School leader? Are you in policy making? Are you working for an NGO like Ellen Rose? A previous webinar, we had quite a large majority of practicing teachers, people who are involved in the day-to-day work of education in classrooms. And it seems to be exactly the same today, even more so. We have many, many teachers with us, which is great. Because you are the one who make it happen. And if we can manage to plant some ideas in your heads, then you can take them further within your own context, within your own network, in your own countries. Start asking questions and start questioning things and going into more unconventional. Okay, somebody can't see the answers. I think most of you can. Anyway, they will, I think, be posted later on. Okay, seems like we have a little problem with the Menti. Not everybody can see the answer. Okay, then I think we will stop this exercise now. We will be able to look at it again. Thank you very, very much for participating. I would now very quickly like to give the floor to Jim Cummins. Please let us know what went through your head when listening to these three very different interesting case studies. Jim, are you still there? Oh, hello. We lost Jim. We lost Jim. Okay, so Jim seems to be temporarily out of action. Such things happens. I think while waiting for Jim to come back online, could I maybe relay some questions to you, Ellen Rose? Because there was quite a big cluster of questions about the nuts and bolts of the daily teaching practice in the language-friendly schools. Do the teachers understand the languages of the students? Do they actually use those languages in teaching? Or which language is actually the language that is used for teaching at a regular basis? Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Sure. Jim, if you can, if it's okay, just step in, because I really want to make sure that Jim gets.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
it's back. Okay.
Great. I
I
apologize because I seem to have lost my audio, but let me know if you can't hear me. And so let me just share my screen if I can. Okay, first of all, let me thank you, Kristina, for helping to organize and steer this ship through what to me over the last 3 or 4 minutes was some turbulent waters I couldn't hear. But I'd also like to thank all 3 of the panelists for their presentations, which were inspirational, and that reflects the work that they have been doing, they and their colleagues have been doing over many years. One of the commonality, obviously, between all 3 presentations is that all 3 are focused on helping schools to promote plurilingualism amongst all students. And they've taken different approaches to doing that, but there's also a shared purpose in terms of what they're doing. So let me try and comment on each of the presentations briefly. So first of all, the Language Friendly Schools project that Ellen Rose and my colleague Emanuela Pichon-Borsman started a number of years ago. I think this is a brilliant concept. It's not that they invented language-friendly schools in reality. There have been many schools over the years whose approach to language has been documented and has shown huge engagement on the part of students. Probably many people in the audience are aware of many of these schools, but the label captures the essence of the idea. For example, what teacher wants to be part of a language unfriendly school? And so when we put the label out there, it enables people to start thinking about, well, what would a language-friendly school be? What kinds of practices are we possibly inadvertently pursuing within our schools that are...
We lost the sound again, Jim. Can't hear you again.
Identities have been suppressed. So I think this is a wonderful approach to bring schools together in a network where they can talk about what exactly does being a language-friendly school look like. And it's not only a focus on the languages of students from immigrant or minoritized language backgrounds, but it also opens up discussion about how language is key to every subject in the school, and how we integrate content and language, and how language is part of our identities, even for those of us who may not have the kinds of fluency in multiple languages that many of the people on the panel have, or many of the people in the audiences have. So congratulations to Ellen Rose and to Emmanuel for this work, and I'm sure it will continue to expand as more people become aware of it. The CertiLingua project that Gisella talked about, again, is an incredibly impressive initiative involving, I think I heard her say 350 or so schools across Europe. And this has exerted significant positive effects on the promotion of plurilingualism. I think it illustrates the power of networking across schools with similar goals and philosophies. And in a way, this is sort of it started off as a top-down approach where certification for the plurilingual capacities of students could be provided as an incentive for schools to make these possibilities available. One concern I have had when I've read about CertiLingua is that it focuses on the languages that are taught in schools. And almost by definition, that excludes the languages of immigrant background communities. And so the question that was going through my mind is, could a project like this reinforce the status gap between what are seen as more prestigious languages largely of European origin, and the languages of immigrant communities? And this is where I think it might be productive for those involved with the Language Friendly Schools project and those involved in CertiLingua to maybe get together and talk about how the insights of both projects could be pursued by maybe expanding the possibilities of providing some kind of recognition for the language competencies that immigrant communities and immigrant students bring to the school. Something like this has happened in the United States with the Seal of Biliteracy project. And I think there could be very productive conversations pursued to ensure that recognition of multiple languages and recognition of linguistic competencies are pursued in a way that includes all the languages that may be present in schools. And then the last presentation that Audrey gave on AIM, again, comes very close to my heart. I was involved in supervising Wendy Maxwell's master's thesis a number of years ago in Toronto. And so I've known about AIM for a long time. And the project, the longitudinal, relatively large-scale study that Audrey and her colleagues pursued in the Dutch context, I think is obviously the most convincing data on the effectiveness of this project, but also the data in Canada shows very similar kinds of outcomes, even though that hasn't always been recognized within the Canadian context. For example, the Bourdage and Vignola study that Audrey mentioned showed that at the grade 3 level, students who were following the AIM program in interviews with the researchers produced 1751 utterances compared to 811 for the non-AIM students. These are twice as many utterances, and these interviews were conducted totally in French. And the AIM students also produced over 1,600 utterances completely in French, 95% in French, compared to only 38% for the non-AIM group. So it's very clear that this approach is effective. It's extremely exciting. And the major issue that I think comes to my mind when I think about AIM is, to what extent can we make it easier for teachers to adopt some of the approaches, because the challenge of acquiring a lot of gestures connected to vocabulary and grammatical aspects of the language is going to has put a lot of teachers off. And I wonder if there could be kind of a pared down aim where a smaller range of gestures that could help mediate the initial language teaching could be adopted, and allow for the other equally important aspects of AIM to click in. So again, I think there are aspects of AIM that could be, in addition to the gestures, that could be incorporated in other programs without necessarily going 100% into the AIM community. I'll leave it at that. And again, thank you to all of the panelists and to Kristina for a very stimulating, for me, morning here in Canada.
Morning for you, afternoon for us. It's already getting late, but if you have time and energy to hang with us another 10 minutes or so.
Okay.
I will launch a couple of very quick question answers. Audrey, some people want to know if it's okay to start AIM at any age, even for students that have started learning languages through a more traditional method. Audrey?
Well, so the methodology AIM exists for very beginners, and I guess you can step in later. And what we did with Project French is that we used the same principles to build the continuation of these methods for older children or for adults, or also for other types of proficiency, for higher proficiency than A2, for instance. So the AIM method really brings you from A0 to a good B1 for the younger children. But then the stories that are developed until now go beyond this age. And I know that they are working on creating stories that are appealing to older teenagers or adults. So in this actual forum, it's more for beginners and for children or young teenagers. But if you go on the website, you will see that we can use the same principles. I agree with Jim on that. There are many principles that are very effective, and of course you can use it for higher proficiency levels and different kinds of ages.
Thank you. Gisella, if we have teachers among the participants today who think that their schools ought to begin a process to become members of the CertiLingua Network, let's say, to make it easy, in a country where CertiLingua already exists, what are the first steps that they should follow?
My suggestion is, first of all, to really understand all the suggestions we have written in the compendium I was mentioning. So visit the website, download the compendium, and see what are the suggestions, especially in the last pages, where it is clearly explained what a teacher in a school could do in order to train the students. Of course, I understand the difficulty that Jim Cummins was pointing about the fact that we are really making CertiLingua a top level for European languages. But as we all know, the more languages you know, the easier is for you to learn new languages. And also, if you have a good mother tongue background, it's much easier for you to get into other languages. So CertiLingua is focusing on B2 certificates. And of course, if we have a Swahili student, unfortunately, Swahili is not a curriculum language in the school, so we cannot evaluate that one. And also, mother tongue students are not allowed to take part as the second language. So it's a bit complicated, but any teacher, in my opinion, understanding that it first of all should focus on the language competencies, but more than that, he should focus on the intercultural development of his or her students' competencies, then it will be a totally different way of approaching languages, because as I was mentioning, CertiLingua is not only a language competence, but the ability to interact, to focus on what is, for a global world, the real and typical way of considering other cultures, other peoples, and being able to mediate and interact with them.
Thank you. Ellen Rose, over to you. Can you say something about the language of schooling versus the languages of the students?
Oh, this is first of all, I want to say I think that would be a great idea for the language friendly school and CertiLingua to get together indeed. How we can work together, and because I can see the requirement of the intercultural understanding and knowledge is something that, of course, migrant children bring with them to the schools. Yeah, we get the question that a lot. Do all the teachers need to speak the languages of all the children in the classroom? No. That is not necessary. There's all kinds of strategies and way that you can still involve languages, even if you have 25 different languages in the classroom. One very practical example is if you are doing a math lesson, that you can ask the children who are speaking the same language to discuss the problem in their own language in small groups, and then come back and discuss it in the school language. It makes some teachers sometimes a little bit nervous because they don't know what's going on and they can't understand it. But what we have seen, what research has shown, is that usually in most of the cases, I mean, they are kids, so they will still sometimes be talking about other things, but most of the time they are really just working on the problem. And it really helps them not just to understand the problem, but also to develop their the math language in their own language. That helps build their knowledge that they need for school, because obviously it's not all about just learning the school language. This is just one example, but there are lots of strategies, and this is exactly what the language friendly does, bringing together all these different strategies that have been described. They are around. And it is really just a matter to get people to practice it.
Thank you. Right. So I think we are coming to the end. We could go on for another hour, but unfortunately that will not be possible. As I said in the beginning, we will have a sum up session in 2 weeks where we will go through the questions and cluster them and try to connect with the questions in our discussion. We are, of course, very, very happy to bring people together. Like Jim said, yes, wouldn't it be brilliant to cross-fertilize the principles of the two different networks, CertiLingua and Language Friendly Schools, and see what kind of interesting school could come out of such a collaboration. So, Ellen Rose, you also very kindly said something about my work in the beginning of the session. And I think I said last week that the best part of my work is that I have the privilege to be able to work with some amazing people that are passionate and incredibly clever and competent, and are also very good networkers, because that's how these ideas gets to grow. And that is very exciting. So I would like to thank you all very, very much for being with us today, this morning for Jim, this afternoon for the others. Thank you very much for everybody who signed on to our Zoom room. We hope that you got some ideas and some inspiration. The webinar will be downloaded to the NESET YouTube channel within a few days, and you will all be contacted for some follow-up. Join us again next week for the third webinar in the series, where we will look more specifically at the role of bilingual education models and language-sensitive curricula in multilingual contexts. We will have examples from the Basque Autonomous Region in Spain, from the Aosta Valley, and we will have Finland, where very interestingly there is a new language strategy, which is part of the legislation and curricula in Finland. So join us again next Wednesday. It's not Thursday, it's Wednesday next week. And we look forward to seeing many of you there. Thank you ever so much. Have a nice evening or day.